It started with a noise. Not the usual hum of lawnmowers or the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, but the unmistakable rumble of heavy machinery. At first, I thought it was just another home improvement project. Someone getting a new driveway, maybe, or a pool. But as the days went by, the noise didn't stop. In fact, it got louder. Trucks came and went, workers in hard hats moved back and forth, and the air was thick with the smell of fresh-cut lumber and diesel fuel. I didn't think much of it until I noticed something strange. The work wasn't happening on the other side of the fence. It was happening on my side. At first I thought I must be mistaken. Maybe the property line wasn't where I thought it was. Maybe the survey stakes had been moved, or maybe I was just being paranoid. But as the foundation was poured and the framing went up, it became clear that this wasn't a small mistake. Someone was building, actually building, on my land, my backyard, the space where my kids played and where I'd planted a row of young trees, was being transformed into someone else's construction site. I tried to stay calm. I pulled out my property survey, the one I'd gotten when I bought the house. I walked the perimeter, checking the markers, measuring the distance from the street. There was no doubt. The new structure was at least 10 feet over the line, squarely on my property. My heart pounded as I realized the implications. This wasn't just a fence in the wrong place or a tree planted too close to the boundary. This was a full-scale building project, and it was happening without my knowledge or consent. The next day, I approached the site supervisor. He was friendly enough at first, but when I explained the situation, his smile faded. "We're just following the plans," he said, shrugging. "If there's a problem, you'll have to take it up with the developer." I asked to see the permits, the plans, anything that would explain how this could have happened. He handed me a set of blueprints, but they didn't match my survey. The property lines were off, and my backyard was clearly included in their project. I called the developer. After several attempts, I finally got through to someone who claimed to be in charge. He was dismissive, insisting that their surveyor had confirmed the boundaries and that everything was above board. When I pressed him, he got defensive. "If you have a problem, talk to your lawyer." And he hung up. That's when I realized this wasn't just a mistake, it was a big mistake, and it was about to get a lot bigger. I started documenting everything. I took photos of the construction, the property markers, the blueprints. I made notes of every conversation, every phone call, every email. I talked to my neighbors, and to my surprise, I wasn't the only one. 2 houses down, another homeowner had noticed the same thing. Construction creeping over the line, workers ignoring the boundaries, developers brushing off concerns. We decided to band together. We pooled our resources and hired a surveyor to do an independent assessment. The results were clear. The new building was encroaching on 3 separate properties, including mine. Armed with this evidence, we contacted a real estate attorney. He listened to our story, reviewed the documents, and shook his head. This is a classic case of encroachment, and it's not going to go away on its own. The next step was to send a formal letter to the developer, demanding that construction stop immediately and that the encroachment be addressed. We gave them a deadline to respond. Days passed with no word. The construction continued as if nothing had happened. Our attorney filed a cease and desist order, and we prepared for a legal battle. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day I watched as the building grew taller, as the workers hammered and sawed and poured concrete on land that wasn't theirs. I felt a mix of anger, frustration, and helplessness. How could this happen? How could a developer just take someone's land and act like it was no big deal? I worried about the cost, the time, the stress of a lawsuit. I worried about what would happen if we lost. But I also felt a sense of resolve. This was my home, my land, my family's future. I wasn't going to let someone take it from me without a fight. As the legal process unfolded, the story started to spread. Neighbors talked, local news picked up the story, and soon people from all over town were asking what was going on. Some were sympathetic, others skeptical. Are you sure about the property lines? Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. But the evidence was clear, and the more people learned, the more support we received. The developer, meanwhile, tried to downplay the situation. They offered to work something out, suggesting we sell them the land at a discount or accept a small payment for the inconvenience. But we knew what our property was worth, and we knew we had the law on our side. The fight was just beginning, but one thing was certain. They built on my land, and it was a big mistake.
The legal battle that followed was nothing like I'd ever experienced. It started with paperwork. So much paperwork. Our attorney filed an official complaint, and the developer's legal team responded with their own stack of documents full of legal jargon and technicalities. They tried to argue that their survey was correct, that the property lines were ambiguous, and that any encroachment was minimal and unintentional. But our independent survey was clear, and our attorney was relentless. He explained that property law is not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of fact. The lines are where the lines are, and no amount of wishful thinking or creative paperwork could change that. The developer's next move was to try to intimidate us. They sent letters threatening counterclaims, suggesting that we were interfering with their business and causing them financial harm. They hinted that if we didn't back down, they would sue us for damages. It was a classic tactic. Bully the little guy until he gives up. But we didn't give up. If anything, their threats made us more determined. We knew we were in the right, and we had the evidence to prove it. As the case moved forward, the construction finally stopped. The cease and desist order was delivered, and the workers packed up their tools and left. The half-finished building stood as a monument to the developer's arrogance, a shell of steel and wood looming over my backyard like a warning. It was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. The noise was gone, but the uncertainty remained. What would happen next? Would the developer tear down the building? Would they try to buy us out? Would we end up in court for years? The neighborhood rallied around us. People who had never spoken to each other before started sharing stories, comparing surveys, and offering support. Some had their own tales of developers pushing boundaries, both literal and figurative. Others were just glad someone was standing up to the big guys. The local news ran a story about our fight, and suddenly we were getting calls from people all over the city, some offering advice, others just wanting to know how it would end. The developer, sensing the tide turning, tried a new approach. They offered to settle the dispute quietly. They proposed a cash payment, a new fence, and a promise to make things right. But the offer was far less than the value of the land they had taken, and it came with strings attached, non-disclosure agreements, waivers of future claims, and a requirement that we drop all legal action. It was tempting, if only to make the whole mess go away, but we knew that accepting their terms would set a dangerous precedent, not just for us, but for anyone else who might find themselves in the same situation. Our attorney advised us to hold firm. He said, "You have the leverage. They can't finish their project without your land. They know it, and now the whole community knows it too." It was a waiting game, and it tested our patience, our finances, and our nerves. There were days when I wondered if it was worth it, when the stress felt overwhelming and the outcome seemed uncertain. But every time I looked out at my backyard, at the place where my kids used to play, I remembered why we were fighting. The case finally went to mediation. We sat across the table from the developer's team, each side flanked by lawyers and stacks of documents. The mediator, a calm and experienced professional, listened to both sides and tried to find common ground. The developer insisted that the encroachment was a simple mistake, that they had acted in good faith, and that they just wanted to finish their project. We insisted that our property rights were non-negotiable, that the law was clear, and that we would not be bullied or bought off. After hours of back and forth, the mediator proposed a solution. The developer would remove the portion of the building that encroached on our land, restore the property to its original condition, and pay for all legal and survey costs. In return, we would agree not to pursue additional damages. It wasn't a perfect outcome. The time, stress, and disruption could never be fully compensated, but it was a victory. We had stood our ground, defended our rights, and forced the developer to admit their mistake. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. The construction crew returned, this time to demolish rather than build. The offending structure was torn down, the land was cleared, and the property lines were restored. It was a bittersweet moment, relief mixed with frustration at how much time and energy had been wasted. But as I watched my backyard return to normal, I felt a sense of pride. We had done what many thought was impossible. We had taken on a powerful developer and won. The experience changed me. I learned that property rights are not just words on a deed. They are a foundation for security, stability, and peace of mind. I learned that standing up for yourself is never easy, but it's always worth it. And I learned that when people come together, they can hold even the most powerful interests accountable.
The aftermath of the battle left a mark on the entire neighborhood. For weeks, the story was all anyone could talk about. Some neighbors stopped by to congratulate us, others to ask for advice, and a few to quietly admit they'd always been afraid to challenge the developer or the HOA. The half-finished building was gone, but the memory of what happened lingered. It was a reminder that even in a quiet suburb, the lines between right and wrong, power and vulnerability can be tested in unexpected ways. I found myself reflecting on how easily things could have gone differently. If I hadn't noticed the construction early, or if I'd ignored the uneasy feeling that something was off, the building might have been finished before anyone realized it was on the wrong land. If I hadn't kept records, taken photos, and talked to my neighbors, I might have been dismissed as just another complainer. If we hadn't banded together, the developer might have steamrollered over us, using their resources and connections to get what they wanted. The lesson was clear. Vigilance matters, and so does community. The experience also changed the way I saw my own property. Before, it was just a backyard, a place for barbecues, for kids to play, for the dog to run. Now it felt like something I had truly fought for. Something I had defended against people who saw it as just another plot of land on a blueprint. I started to appreciate the boundaries, the trees I'd planted, the memories we'd made. I realized that property isn't just about ownership, it's about stewardship, about caring for something that's yours and making sure it's protected for the future. The developer, for their part, moved on to other projects. They never apologized publicly, but word got around that they were more careful with surveys and boundaries after our case. Other homeowners in the area became more proactive, checking their own property lines, attending HOA meetings, and asking questions about new developments. The local government even updated some of its procedures, requiring more thorough checks before issuing building permits. Our fight had ripple effects, changing not just our own situation, but the way the whole community approached land and development. But the story didn't end there. A few months after the dust settled, I got a letter from the developer's legal team. They wanted to clarify the terms of the settlement and ensure there were no outstanding issues. It was a reminder that even after a victory, you have to stay alert. I forwarded the letter to our attorney, who assured me that everything was in order and that we had nothing to worry about. Still, it was a lesson in how persistent and resourceful big companies can be when their interests are at stake. Through it all, I learned the value of documentation. Every photo, every email, every note from a conversation became part of the record that protected us. I started keeping a file for anything related to the property. Surveys, permits, correspondence with the HOA or the city. It was tedious, but it gave me peace of mind. If anything like this ever happened again, I'd be ready. I also learned the importance of communication. Talking to my neighbors, sharing information, and working together made all the difference. Alone, I might have been ignored or overwhelmed. Together, we had a voice that couldn't be dismissed. We learned to trust each other, to share resources, and to support one another through the stress and uncertainty. The experience turned strangers into allies, and in some cases, friends. Looking back, I realized that the fight wasn't just about property lines or legal rights. It was about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. It was about refusing to be bullied or intimidated, about demanding respect and accountability from those in power. It was about protecting not just my own interests, but the interests of everyone who calls this neighborhood home. The story also made me think about the bigger picture. How many other people have lost land, money, or peace of mind because they didn't know their rights or because they were too afraid to speak up? How many developers or HOAs have gotten away with overreach because no one challenged them? I realized that sharing my story could help others avoid the same mistakes or find the courage to fight back when they need to. So I started talking about what happened. I shared my experience at HOA meetings, in local Facebook groups, and even at a city council forum. I encouraged others to check their property lines, to read their deeds and surveys, to keep records and ask questions. I told them that it's okay to push back, to demand answers, to insist on fairness. I reminded them that the law is on their side and that they don't have to face these battles alone. The journey wasn't easy, and there were times when I wanted to give up. But in the end, I was glad I stood my ground. They built on my land, and it was a big mistake, not just for them, but for anyone who thinks they can take what isn't theirs without a fight.
The story of "they built on my land, big mistake" didn't just end with a legal victory or a restored backyard. It became a turning point in how I saw myself, my home, and my role in the community. Before all this, I'd never thought of myself as someone who would take on a developer, organize neighbors, or speak at public meetings. I was just a homeowner who wanted a quiet life. But when someone crossed the line, literally and figuratively, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. The experience taught me that standing up for your rights isn't just about confrontation, it's about preparation and persistence. There were days when I felt overwhelmed by the paperwork, the legal jargon, and the endless waiting. There were nights when I worried about the cost, the outcome, and the stress it was putting on my family. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered what was at stake. This wasn't just about a few feet of land. It was about fairness, respect, and the principle that no one should be able to take what isn't theirs just because they have more money or power. As the months passed, I became more involved in the neighborhood. I started attending HOA meetings regularly, not just when there was a problem. I got to know the board members, learned how decisions were made, and even volunteered for a committee. I realized that the best way to prevent future problems was to be part of the process, to have a voice in the decisions that affected all of us. I encouraged my neighbors to do the same, and together we started to see changes. More transparency, better communication, and a stronger sense of community. The developer, meanwhile, seemed to have learned their lesson. They became more cautious, more willing to listen, and less likely to cut corners. I heard from other homeowners that their projects were now double-checked for boundary issues and that they were more responsive to concerns. It wasn't a perfect outcome. There were still disagreements and frustrations, but it was a step in the right direction. One of the most unexpected outcomes was the sense of empowerment that came from sharing my story. When I spoke at meetings or posted online, people reached out to thank me, to share their own experiences, or to ask for advice. Some were dealing with similar issues, encroachment, unfair fines, or unresponsive boards, and wanted to know how to fight back. Others just wanted to know that they weren't alone. I realized that by speaking up, I was helping to create a culture where people felt more confident standing up for themselves. The experience also changed the way I thought about property and community. I used to see my home as just a place to live, a private space separate from the world outside. But now I saw it as part of something bigger, a neighborhood, a network of people with shared interests and responsibilities. I realized that protecting my rights wasn't just about drawing lines on a map. It was about building relationships, fostering trust, and working together to solve problems.
There were still challenges, of course. Not everyone agreed with the way things had been handled. Some people thought we should have settled quietly, taken the money, and moved on. Others worried that the fight had made the neighborhood less attractive to buyers or had driven up legal costs for everyone. But most people understood that the real issue wasn't just about land or money, it was about standing up for what's right. Looking back, I'm grateful for the lessons I learned. I learned the importance of knowing your rights, of keeping good records, and of being willing to ask questions. I learned that you don't have to face big challenges alone, and that there's strength in community. I learned that even when the odds seem stacked against you, persistence and preparation can make all the difference. Most of all, I learned that sometimes the biggest mistakes are the ones that teach us the most. The developer thought they could build on my land without consequence. They were wrong. And in the process of fighting back, I discovered a resilience and a sense of purpose that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. The story became a cautionary tale in the area. Real estate agents started reminding buyers to check their surveys and property lines. The city council discussed ways to improve oversight and prevent similar issues in the future. And neighbors who had once been strangers now greeted each other with a sense of camaraderie, knowing that they'd face a challenge together and come out stronger. In the end, the fight over my land was about more than just boundaries. It was about community, courage, and the belief that ordinary people can make a difference when they stand up for what's right. They built on my land, and it was a big mistake. Not just for them, but for anyone who underestimates the power of a determined homeowner and a united neighborhood.